Hello everyone, my name is AlzboHD, and today we are going to explore the state of Austria in the 1.30 Emperor update. Using and abusing the new Imperial Incident mechanics allows you to pass all Holy Roman Empire reforms in less than 40 years, making a world conquest all but a certainty. You can use these strategies to not only form the Holy Roman Empire before the Age of Exploration, but you can also use them to unleash vassal army swarms to decimate your opponents. But first, credit where credit is due. This guide video is inspired by Reddit user 414Ben's 1646 revoke post on the EU4 subreddit. While I am by no means a pro EU4 min-maxing player, accomplishing this as a normal player in 1.30 is surprisingly easy. While the opening Austrian strategies we will explore will work on all patches and versions of the game, it is highly likely that this fast revoke technique will be patched out and nerfed in an upcoming update. It's time to get started with our guide. We will start our Iron Man campaign as the Austrian Chen Dynasty, so go ahead and select them and start a new save. Before unpausing the game, hire 8 infantry units in your northern provinces, taking a loan or debasing currency as necessary. Afterwards, go ahead and set your rivals. For our opening strategy, we need to unlock the first Bohemian mission. To that end, we must improve relations with the 5 electors in the HRE, increasing their opinion of us up to plus 100 each. I recommend allying them, royal marrying them, and sending them ducats and military access for opinion. At the same time, go ahead and set up a spy network in Venice and fabricate a claim on one of their provinces when possible. After a few months, 5 of your electors should be at plus 100 opinion and the mission will unlock. Go ahead and click the mission to get your personal union CB on Bohemia, and then mobilize your military on the border of Bohemia. We're about to declare war and get our first PU. Once your troops are on the border, declare war using the personal union Casus Belli and drag in allies if possible. Your primary objective now is to stack wipe their regiments and occupy their capital as fast as possible. During the war, go ahead and improve relations with all periphery nations that are not already in the HRE. These peripheral nations will automatically join the HRE once their opinion raises enough from you, which will grant you plus 10 imperial authority per nation. While improving relations, continue the war and occupy Bohemia's vassals to increase war score. At this point, Bohemia's war exhaustion should be rising, and their war enthusiasm will be low. When it's possible, go ahead and press for peace and enforce a personal union on them and take all of their money. With our first personal union out of the way, it's time to focus on Hungary. You can now complete your next mission, which will grant you a new Casus Belli to enforce a PU on Hungary. Now we will act quickly and mobilize our troops to the Hungarian border. Before starting our war, go ahead and check the Disputed Succession tab at the top of your screen. This will show all old rulers without heirs and is an excellent place to familiarize yourself with during an Austrian campaign. The nations in this tab are vulnerable to falling under a PU, and we want to secure subjects for ourselves. So go ahead and royal marry the larger nations who have older heirs. In this case, we will marry Castile. They have an event that will give us an automatic Habsburg heir, though it's not necessary to enforce a PU on them at this time. You should now also improve relations with Bohemia so that they become loyal. I recommend paying royalists in the subject mechanic menu if they are still disloyal so that they will join our next war. And speaking of war, when you're ready, go ahead and consolidate your troops and consider hiring mercenaries. It's time now to declare war. During the war, your first priority is to take the Hungarian capital. With your new Bohemian subject state, you should make quick work of Hungary, Croatia, and whatever ally they decide to call in to protect them. While fighting, continue improving relations with nations on the HRE periphery, especially the Papal State, who will join the HRE shortly after this war. Work together with your subjects to conquer as many forts as possible to lower Hungarian war enthusiasm. It might also be necessary to take out and occupy their allies' territory as well. When Hungary is finally ready for a peace treaty, take them in a union. If you have any war score left over, you can also consider releasing some of their nations, which will speed up the HRE formation. After peace, your diplomatic situation is substantially stronger than the start. You have Bohemia, Hungary, and Croatia as personal union partners, and you potentially have Habsburg heirs on foreign thrones. With that out of the way, go ahead and complete the next Hungarian mission and pass your first reform. When you unpause the game, you'll also get a spike in imperial authority after passing the reform, since Croatia and Hungary will join the HRE immediately. As a reminder, each time a nation joins the HRE, they give you plus 10 imperial authority, so keep this in mind, it's very, very powerful. At this point, it's a good idea to ensure that you still have elector support, so go ahead and check the HR screen to make sure that they're supporting you for the next imperial secession. You can use this time to improve relations with the electors as needed, and you should also consider improving relations with your new Hungarian subjects. It's important now to let your war exhaustion die down a bit, so we're going to move our troops to the border of Venice. During this period of peace, you should improve relations with as many periphery nations as possible, allying them if necessary. You can also ally them to improve relations, and then disband the alliance afterwards. They'll still join the Holy Roman Empire. Good targets for this strategy are the Papal States, Ragusa and the Balkan Minors, and Provence if they have not joined yet. Each time one joins, you get 10 more imperial authority, and we need at least 50 to pass the next reform. During this period, it's likely that Hungary will absorb Croatia during an event. That's fine, and we don't care. After using this strategy and getting some nations to join the HRE, you should have 50 imperial authority. Pass the reform and disband any of the temporary allies that you've selected to join the HRE. Go ahead and move your troops to the Venetian border and prepare for more war. When you're ready, declare war for your claim in Venice and drag in your allies and subjects. The goal here is to beat releasable nations out of Venice to increase our imperial authority. Stack wipe their troops, occupy their allies, in this case Scilly, and work your way through the Venetian coastal forts. After some time, their war exhaustion and war enthusiasm will weaken severely, allowing you to make demands. At about 40 or 50 war score, you can enforce a peace where they release 3 vassals. These nations will later join the HRE after their truce, but if you want to speed up the reforms, you can always take the territory and release them as a subject, which will get them to join the HRE immediately and gain you 30 more imperial authority. After the war, continue increasing relations with non-princes on the periphery of the HRE. If you want, you can also declare war on the Balkan Minors to vassalize them, adding them to the HRE and gaining you even more imperial authority for reforms. You should fairly quickly get 50 more imperial authority, and it's time to reform once again and unlock the 3rd reform. This reform is notable as it allows you to declare war on all neighboring territories to the HRE, which you can then vassalize or release and add to the empire for even more authority gain. It's time for us to detail some techniques and tips for you to snowball using this strategy. Speaking of the new CB, you should start using it on all neighboring weaker states. I recommend targeting Provence, Naples, and Burgundy if they are weak. Go ahead and declare war on them, and during the peace treaties have these states release nations and vassalize them so that we can add them to the empire and increase our imperial authority. It's time to go absolutely crazy and expand everywhere you can. Every time you get 50 imperial authority, press for peace and sign the next reform. It's important to remember that you can only sign reforms during peace, so be sure to time your wars appropriately. Soon enough, you should be able to pick up your first national idea group. I highly recommend taking either diplomatic or influence ideas, as they provide huge bonuses to playing as the Emperor of the HRE. I personally prefer the diplomatic group, which I will select for my campaign, as it provides an additional diplomat from the very beginning, which we can use to recruit more nations into the empire. As you get stronger and accumulate more vassals, go ahead and strike out at France to release even more nations for the growing empire. They are still relatively weak in the early game, and with your subjects' help you should easily be able to overpower them. Like before, sign a peace that releases as many nations as possible from them so that they will join the HRE and grant you ever more imperial authority. While pressing for reforms, it is likely that the Shadow Empire Imperial Incident will make an appearance. This is actually fantastic news, as we can exploit the mechanic to get between 40 to 80 more imperial authority by letting them leave. Select the option to release the Italian states from the HRE and make sure you're at peace before the incident resolves. The Italian states will leave the HRE and rejoin immediately after you increase their relations, spiking your authority up substantially. You should now be getting close to passing the 5th reform, where you can reform the Imperial Diet. While waiting to reform the Imperial Diet, go ahead and continue increasing relations with bordering nations, allying them when possible to get them to join and disbanding their alliance after they're in the HRE. If you've been following these steps so far, you should soon be at the point where you can reform the Imperial Diet. From this point onwards, we will no longer be passing general reforms, instead passing the centralization reforms to eventually vassalize every prince in the empire. It's time now to move on to the next step. At some point soon, it's likely that unique Austrian events will pop up, like this one detailing the Milanese secession. If you're lucky and get the event, you can select the option to gain a personal union CB on Milan. If so, declare war on them and subjugate them as a PU, and consider releasing some of their cores as independent nations to join the HRE. As we've done before, continue declaring war on everyone bordering the empire to add more nations and cores to the HRE, steadily increasing your rate of imperial authority gain. A good target is the Balkans, if they've chosen to remain outside of the imperial borders. After you subjugate and vassalize more nations, go ahead and pass the first centralization reform when you're at 50 imperial authority. It's quickly worth noting that at the time of this recording, the Enforce Imperial Borders CB is bugged, and if you select the option for a nation to join the HRE in the peace treaty, it will not work. Instead, you should take land directly and release the cores as nations, which will add them to the HRE and grant you the usual plus 10 authority apiece. And this time, I declared war on Venice and released 4 of their nations as vassals, gaining me plus 40 imperial authority gain in 1 month after the peace. When you can, sign the second centralization reform and get ready for more war. It's time now to move on to the final stretch of our guide. At this point, you only need to pass 2 more imperial reforms before you can revoke the privilegia and vassalize every nation in the HRE as a direct subject. It's a good idea to focus your efforts now on the big boys of Burgundy, the Ottomans, and France to declare wars to take more cores. Remember that aggressive expansion is only a number, and your huge array of subject states will make short work of any resistance. All belongs to the Chen dynasty. After a war or 2 with the remaining major powers, annex their land in the peace treaty and release them as more subject nations, who will then immediately join the HRE and grant you more imperial authority. I'm sure by now your diplomatic monarch power generation is severely stunted since you have like 12 subjects, but you can opt to release your nations after the peace treaties are no longer valid. When you gain 50 more authority, go ahead and pass the third reform, which is the final reform before revoking the privilegia. Your imperial authority will now greatly increase per month, making this substantially easier. As we've done before, continue warring on all of your neighbors to release nations and vassalize any that pop out from peace deals. To be honest, it should only take 1 war before being able to reform the 4th and most valuable reform in the HRE. When you're at 50 imperial authority once again, and at peace, sign the 4th reform and revoke the privilegia. Now that you've revoked the privilegia, you now control all imperial states in the HRE as direct vassals. If you followed the guide thus far, you should also still be in the Age of Exploration, and can now easily destroy any remaining resistance on the European continent. You have a massive vassal swarm of near 100 nations at your bidding, and can declare wars, where you can let them do everything while you sip tea in Vienna. At this point, you can finish off your mission tree, which will later grant you the AIEOU achievement. You can also opt to keep expanding the HRE or straight out annex all subjects with the final reform, which changes your nation to the newly improved Holy Roman Empire tag. I'd recommend waiting before doing this, and instead using your vassal swarm, but what you do in your campaign is entirely up to you. If you decide to keep the vassal swarm, which is objectively more powerful in the early to mid game, you can add any nation that you subjugate into the empire by annexing their territory and releasing their cores as a vassal. Using this strategy, they will join the HRE and not cost any diplomatic upkeep as your subject, allowing you to make unlimited vassals out of all of the cores in the European continent. This only applies to Europe though, since the HRE cannot expand outside of this region, so keep this in mind. To be honest, I'm not a huge fan of powerful positions or nations like this, so if you're like me, you'll probably grow bored at how overpowered you are at this point. If you want to, you could always do a world conquest, and you're in a powerful position to do so. If you've made it this far, I'd like to thank you very much for watching and supporting the YouTube algorithm. If you'd like to check out more 1.30 EU4 content, consider subscribing to the channel, where there'll be a lot more guides and highlight videos detailing the most massive EU4 update to date. A special thank you and shout out goes to all of my fans and viewers for supporting the channel. Without further ado, it's time to roll the credits.